Act 1. The Light That Burns Within. Chapters 1 through 5. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Held the Sun. There was a moment, just before consciousness fully returned, when Issei Hayadu existed in a place without edges. No ceiling. No floor. No sound except something impossibly distant, a hum that started somewhere deep in the chest and spread outward like warmth from a hearthstone on a winter morning. He did not dream in that space. He simply was. Then pain reminded him that he was still alive. It arrived not all at once but in stages, the way light fills a room when curtains are slowly drawn back. First his ribs. Then his left shoulder. Then, with a particular cruelty, the back of his skull where the pavement had introduced itself without ceremony. Issei opened his eyes. He was lying in the alley behind the shopping district, the same alley where he had agreed to meet Yuma Amano for what he had believed would be his first real date. The sky above was deep violet, caught between sunset and full dark, and the first stars were pressing through like silver needles through dark cloth. He remembered her smile. He remembered the way her voice had turned hollow at the end, the warmth draining out of it the way water drains from a glass tipped sideways. He remembered two enormous wings spreading against the fading sky, black as ink spilled across parchment. Then the light. Not hers. His. Issei pressed his right hand flat against the ground and pushed himself upright, and the moment his palm touched the cracked asphalt something hummed through the bones of his fingers. He looked down at his hand in the low light and saw nothing extraordinary. Ordinary knuckles. Ordinary skin. The faint lines and calluses of a 16-year-old boy who spent too much time at a table with manga and not enough time sleeping. But the warmth was still there. Sitting just beneath the surface, patient as a banked coal. He should have been dead. He knew this the way a person knows a fact they have memorized but not yet fully understood. The fallen angel Yuma had driven a spear of pure light through his chest. He had felt the impact. He had felt the cold spreading outward from the wound. He had stared up at the same darkening sky and thought, with surprising clarity for a dying boy, that he had not yet told his parents he was grateful for the boxed lunches his mother packed even when the rice went a little dry by noon, and then something had answered him. Not a voice, exactly. Not words. More like the feeling of standing in an open field in mid-July when the sun is directly overhead and the heat is not uncomfortable but instead absolute, pressing against every inch of skin simultaneously, insisting on itself. It had come from inside him. Issei got to his feet. His school uniform was torn at the shoulder, and there was dried blood on his collar. But when he pulled the fabric aside and looked at his chest, there was no wound. Not even a scar. Just skin that felt warmer than usual, warmer than the cooling evening air could explain. He picked up his bag from where it had fallen, shouldered it, and walked home. He did not run. Some instinct he could not name told him that whatever had happened in this alley, whatever was still happening inside the quiet warmth of his right hand, it was not the kind of thing that should be hurried. The Hayadu residence sat on a quiet residential street 3 blocks from the commercial district, an ordinary house with an ordinary gate, and a small garden his mother tended with enthusiastic disorganization. The lights were on in the kitchen. Through the frosted glass panel beside the front door he could see the rectangular glow of the television in the living room. Issei stood at the gate for a long moment. Inside was dinner. Inside was his mother's voice asking how school had been. Inside was the particular smell of the house he had grown up in, wood and old books and whatever was simmering on the stove, and all of it was entirely unchanged from this morning when he had left with his heart hammering and his hair carefully combed because today was the day Yuma had promised to meet him. He had died today, or something close enough to dying that the distance between the two felt negligible. And he was standing at his own front gate with homework in his bag and a warmth in his hand that had no explanation, and the most extraordinary thing he could think to do was go inside and eat dinner. He pushed open the gate. That night, lying on his back in the dark of his room with the ceiling staring down at him with its familiar pattern of water stains, and the small glow-in-the-dark star stickers he had put up in 6th grade and never taken down, Issei held his right hand up. Nothing visible. He concentrated. Tried to find the warmth deliberately, the way you try to find a word that is sitting on the very tip of your tongue. He thought about sunlight. He thought about midsummer heat. He thought about that moment in the alley when the cold of the wound had been replaced by something enormous and insistent, and, he realized now, not frightening at all. A faint golden light gathered in the center of his palm. It lasted for perhaps 3 seconds before he startled himself out of concentration, and it dissolved. But it had been there. Real and warm and undeniably his. He lowered his hand to his chest and lay in the dark listening to the house settle around him. Something had changed tonight. Something fundamental and irreversible, like the moment a seed cracks open and the first pale thread of root presses down into the soil. He did not know what it meant yet. He did not know the name for what lived now in the warmth beneath his ribs. But he knew this. When the light had come, when the cold of dying had been answered by that absolute summer noon heat, he had not felt afraid. He had felt, for one breathless moment, as though he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He closed his eyes. Outside his window, the autumn stars continued their patient burning. Chapter 2, The Girl with Crimson Hair. Rias Gremery had been watching Issei Hayata for 3 days before she decided he was, in fact, still alive. This was not as straightforward a determination as it should have been. She sat in the clubroom of the old school building, the space that had been quietly claimed by the Occult Research Club and quietly forgotten by the rest of Ko Academy, and turned a small chess piece between her fingers. A pawn. White ivory gone slightly yellow at its base from years of handling. She set it on the table and looked at it. The window to her right showed the school courtyard in late afternoon gold. Students moved in small groups along the paths below, collars turned up against the October chill, voices rising and then falling like birds startled from a branch. Among them, somewhere, was a boy who should have died 3 days ago. A boy who had apparently not died. A boy who, according to every sensitivity she possessed and every instrument available to her, was now carrying something inside him that made absolutely no sense. The door to the clubroom opened. Akino Himejima entered with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to move through spaces without disturbing them, setting a tray with 2 cups of tea on the edge of the table before settling into the chair across from her president with the particular grace that was entirely her own. He was in 3rd period literature today, Akino said. Her long black hair was tied over one shoulder. She was looking at Rias with an expression of calm interest, the same expression she brought to most things. He spent approximately 12 minutes staring at his right hand rather than his textbook. The teacher did not notice. What did his energy signature read? Warm, Akino said. Consistently warm. Not fluctuating the way you would expect if he were simply frightened or agitated. Stable. Like a sustained source rather than a reaction. Rias lifted her own teacup and held it without drinking. The porcelain was warm against her palms. A fallen angel strike to the chest at that range should have been fatal, she said. Not as a challenge. Simply as a fact that continued to resist her attempts to file it away neatly. Yes, Akino agreed. And there is no record of him having been resurrected by any devil clan in the region. I would have known. Sona would have known. Yes, Akino said again, in the same tone. Rias set her cup down. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the courtyard with its long evening shadows and its ordinary students carrying ordinary concerns. Then something saved him, she said quietly. Something that was already there. Already his. Akino was quiet for a moment. Then, there is one other reading I want to note. When I passed close to him in the hallway this morning, for just a moment, the energy signature expanded. As though it became aware of proximity. Rias turned from the window. Aware. That is the word that fits best. Rias looked at the white pawn on the table. She thought about the reports she had read regarding the sacred gears, those divine artifacts sealed inside human beings at the moment of their birth. She thought about the rarest of them. The ones that existed outside the standard classification system. The ones that chose their hosts rather than being assigned to them. I need to speak with him, she said. He will be at the school gate in approximately 40 minutes, Akino said, lifting her teacup with a small smile. Rias almost smiled back. Issei Hayata, for his part, was having a profoundly strange 40 minutes. He had, in the 3 days since the alley, developed a working theory about his situation. The theory was this. Something supernatural had happened to him. Something was now living in his right hand or possibly his entire right side judging by the warmth, and the correct approach was to wait calmly and see what happened next rather than to spiral into panic and tell anyone. The theory was, by most measures, not a very good theory. But it was the only one he had, and it had the significant advantage of allowing him to attend classes and eat meals and maintain the impression of normalcy that his parents' continued peace of mind depended upon. He was at his shoe locker when the warmth in his right hand suddenly intensified. Not painfully. Just insistently, the way a hand on your shoulder insists on attention without gripping. He looked up from his locker and found himself looking at the back courtyard visible through the window at the end of the corridor, and there was someone standing at the gate. Crimson hair. Long, catching the last horizontal light of afternoon, and holding it the way red glass holds a flame behind it. He had seen her before. The whole school had seen her. Rias Gremery was the kind of presence that a school notices and then spends considerable energy pretending not to notice too obviously. President of the Occult Research Club. Third-year student. Reportedly from a distinguished family somewhere in Europe. She was looking directly at him, across the length of a crowded corridor, through a window, in the fading afternoon light. Looking directly at him with an expression he could not fully read at this distance but which contained, he thought, something like recognition. The warmth in his hand pulsed once, steady as a heartbeat. Issei closed his locker and went to the gate. She waited until the last of the other students had passed before she spoke. Issei Hayadu, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said, which was also not a question but felt like one. She studied him for a moment with those blue-green eyes that were impossible to look away from without considerable effort. He made the effort anyway and looked at a point slightly to her left, which helped somewhat. You were attacked 3 nights ago, she said. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. I don't know what you're. A fallen angel. You were struck. You should not have survived. The denial died somewhere between his lungs and his mouth. He looked back at her directly, and found she was not accusing him of anything. Her expression was careful and precise, and, underneath its composure, genuinely curious. I know, he said, because it was true and because lying about a thing you have both acknowledged seems like a particular waste of time. She nodded once, as though he had confirmed something. The warmth you have been feeling, she said. In your right hand. In your chest. He went very still. I can sense it, she said, not unkindly. It is significant. Perhaps the most significant thing I have encountered in some years. She paused. I would like to explain some things to you, if you will allow me. There is a great deal happening around you that you cannot yet see, and I believe you deserve to understand it. The late sun was turning the edge of her hair to copper and flame. Behind her, the school building cast its long evening shadow across the courtyard. Issei thought about the alley. He thought about dying. He thought about the golden light that gathered in his palm when he concentrated, small and warm and real. Okay, he said. Chapter 3. What Burns in the Bones. The Occult Research Club's clubroom was not what Issei had expected, which admittedly was nothing specific, since he had not expected to be in it at all. It was a comfortable room. An old sofa along one wall, deep and worn in the particular way that meant it had been used rather than displayed. Bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with volumes that ranged from clearly academic to clearly ancient. A table with chess pieces arranged mid-game. 2 tall windows looking out at the school grounds in the last light, and outside the windows the October evening was going quietly blue. Akino Himejima poured tea with the practiced calm of someone who has done it often and finds it genuinely pleasant rather than performative. She set the cup in front of Issei without comment and returned to her position near the window, which he noticed allowed her to watch both the room and the door simultaneously. Rias sat across from him. She had set a small stack of books to one side and folded her hands on the table between them, and she looked at him with the settled attention of someone who has prepared for a conversation and intends to have it properly. I will start with what I know for certain, she said, and then I will tell you what I suspect, and I will distinguish clearly between the two. Okay, Issei said. There is a world layered beneath the visible one. 3 primary factions exist within it, devils, angels, and fallen angels, along with a number of other species whose details I can explain later. This town, Ko, falls within a territory administered by my family. I am a devil, Issei. Aquino as well. She said this the way she said everything, with a measured directness that was not recklessness but was certainly not apology. The creature that attacked you 3 nights ago was a fallen angel. Her name was Rainier. She targeted you specifically. Why? Rias glanced at his right hand on the table. Because she, or her superiors, had reason to believe you carried something extraordinary. A sacred gear is a divine artifact given to certain humans at birth. Most are known and catalogued. Yours is not catalogued. Issei looked at his hand. In the warm light of the clubroom it looked entirely ordinary. I have spent the last 3 days attempting to identify it, Rias continued. I have consulted sources that cover nearly the full range of classified sacred gears. I have found nothing that matches your signature. She paused. What I have found instead is a description. Ancient. Incomplete. Referring to a power that was not created through the standard processes of sacred gear formation, but arose independently, perhaps only once in recorded history. The room was very quiet. Issei could hear the building around them, the small sounds of an old structure settling into evening. What is it? He asked. It is described in the oldest texts as Solis Cor, Rias said. The Latin fell into the silence precisely. The heart of the sun. She studied his face. Do you understand what that means, practically speaking? Not even slightly, he said honestly. A corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close to one. Sacred gears, the well-known ones, are defined by their relationship to a specific mythological figure or concept. Boosted gear, for instance, the most famous of the Longinus class, derives its power from the Welsh dragon, Draig. It boosts. It multiplies. Its nature is expansion through accumulation. She reached forward and placed the white pawn on its side. What you carry is different. The sun is not a borrowed power. It does not refer back to a contained mythological entity. It is fundamental. A principle rather than a personality. A principle, Issei repeated. Light. Heat. Growth. The thing that makes plants turn toward windows. The thing that burns away what is false and sustains what is true. She looked at him steadily. And in every mythology that acknowledges it, a power that cannot be held by someone who has not earned it. Issei was quiet for a moment. Through the window he could see the first stars. Why did it save me? Rias unfolded her hands and sat back slightly. For the first time since he had come into this room she looked, not uncertain exactly, but thoughtful in a way that reached further back than this conversation. That, she said, is the question I cannot fully answer yet. But I have a hypothesis. She leaned forward again, and the candlelight from the tall lamp in the corner caught the edge of her hair and turned it extraordinary. I think it chose you, she said. Not because you are powerful. Not because you are connected to any lineage or faction or divine plan that I can identify. I think it chose you because of something in you that is simply and entirely yours. She paused. I have been doing this for a long time, Issei. I have met humans with sacred gears. I have never met one who looked at his own dying and, instead of fear, produced light. Issei looked down at the table. He thought about what he had actually felt in the alley. He had tried to reconstruct it these past 3 days, picking it apart the way you pick apart a half-remembered dream. Not fear, yes. He had felt fear first, when the spear struck. But then, beneath the cold, beneath the spreading dark, something else. Stubbornness, he thought. The sheer unreasonable refusal to let that be the end. And then the warmth had answered the refusal. I don't feel like someone who earned a son, he said. Very few people who earn anything significant feel like they have, Rias said. She stood and went to the window, her back to him, looking out at the evening. What matters now is that you have it, and that the people who sent Rainier will not simply stop because she failed. She turned back. I would like to help you learn to use it. I would like to do this properly, with your full understanding of what it means, rather than simply recruiting you into a faction and handing you obligations you never agreed to. You're telling me I might be useful to you, he said. Not accusingly. I am telling you that I want you to know it, she said. Because I also want to help you, entirely separate from strategy, and I do not want those two things to become confused. Not for you, and not for me. He thought about this for a long moment. Outside the window the school grounds were going amber in late afternoon light. A bird crossed the window in brief silhouette. Can both things be true at the same time? He asked. You wanting to help me and me being useful to you. I think they can, she said. I think they are. I wanted to be certain you thought so too, rather than simply assuming. He looked at the chess pieces. The white pawn that she had tilted on its side in their first conversation was still lying there. He picked it up and set it upright. I want to be useful, he said. Not as a piece you move around. But actually useful. I want to learn enough to matter. Something in her face shifted, a subtle thing, like a door that has been braced against the frame settling slightly open. Then we are in agreement, she said. Aquino arrived with tea a few minutes later and found them both studying the chess board, Rias explaining the position with the precision of someone who has thought about it extensively, Issei asking questions that were, she noted to herself, the right questions. She set the tea down quietly and did not interrupt. Chapter 4. The First Lesson. The training ground was in the basement of the old school building, a space that technically did not appear on any official floor plan and which Issei suspected was maintained through the same quiet supernatural administration that kept everyone from noticing the occult research club existed at all. It was large, much larger than the building's exterior would suggest, with a ceiling high enough to lose detail in and a floor of packed earth that suggested it had been used for exactly this purpose for a very long time. Ria stood at one end in different clothes than her school uniform. Dark training attire, practical, and she held her arms loosely at her sides with the relaxed readiness of someone entirely comfortable in a space built for combat. Issei stood at the other end feeling considerably less relaxed. We are not going to push anything today, Ria said. Her voice carried well into space. Nothing forceful. Nothing that asks the power to respond before you have any relationship with it. That is how people are hurt, and I will not have you hurt. Okay, Issei said. What I want you to do is remember. He blinked. Remember? The first time it appeared. In the alley? Before you were fully conscious of it. She walked toward him slowly, not approaching close but reducing the distance to a conversational one. Do not try to recreate the desperation of that moment. I am not asking you to frighten yourself. What I am asking you to find is the thing underneath the desperation. The thing that was already there before the crisis gave it permission to move. He thought about this. He had described it to himself, in the solitude of his room, as stubbornness. But that was not quite right either. Stubbornness implied resistance, a pushing against something. What he had felt was different. More like recognition, like hearing a piece of music for the first time and knowing, with inexplicable certainty, that you have always known it. He closed his eyes. He thought about summer. Not a specific summer but the accumulated weight of all summers, the particular quality of light in late July, gold and heavy and present, the way it falls on everything without preference or exception, stone and skin and leaf and water, all equally and entirely. The warmth in his right hand deepened. He felt it spread, not urgently, but with the patience of something that has been waiting very quietly for an invitation. Up his wrist. Through the bones of his forearm. Settling in his chest alongside his heartbeat, and for a moment the two rhythms were different, the heartbeat and the warmth, and then they were the same. He opened his eyes. His right hand was luminous. Not blazing, not theatrical. The light was golden and even, like sunlight held inside a cupped hand, and it cast a warm circle on the packed earth floor around him. Ria stood very still. Her expression was attentive and controlled, but behind the control was something unmistakably moved. There, she said softly. The light was steady. It did not flicker. He turned his hand slowly palm up and watched the light move with it, patient and warm and entirely unhurried, and he had the sudden irrational thought that this was what it felt like to hold morning. How does it feel? Rias asked. He tried to find the right word. Like breathing, he said finally. Like something I should have always been doing and didn't know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, can you walk while holding it? He took a step. The light held. Another step. Still steady. He walked the length of the training ground slowly. His right hand lit from within like a lantern, and the golden circle moved with him across the packed earth floor, and Rias watched him walk with an expression he was not looking at because he was watching the light, so he did not see the way her hands had loosened at her sides from their trained readiness into something more open. He reached the far wall and turned. It doesn't want to hurt anything, he said, understanding this as he said it. The light. It doesn't have that kind of pressure. It's not trying to, he searched for the word, it's not pushing outward. It's just present. Yes, Rias said, and her voice had changed slightly, the instructional composure still there but layered now over something that recognized what he was describing. That is what every account I found suggested. The sun does not attack. It reveals. It sustains. It burns away falsehood and darkness not by force but by presence. She paused. Its offensive capacity, when it develops one, will come from the same place. Not violence. Inevitability. Issei let the light fade slowly. It went the way sunsets go, not abruptly but diminishing through gold to amber to the ordinary warmth beneath his skin. I want to learn to do that in the middle of everything else, he said. Not just standing still. That is exactly what we will teach you, Rias said. She turned toward the stairs. Come. Aquino has made dinner. He followed her, and noticed as they climbed that she moved with 3 inches more ease than when they had descended. Dinner at the clubroom table was simpler than he had expected, and better. Aquino had made rice and a clear soup that managed to be both light and warming, and the 3 of them sat at the table with the chess game pushed aside, and it was almost ordinary. Almost, except for the quality of the silence between topics of conversation, which was the comfortable kind. Can I ask something? Issei said, between soup and rice. You may ask anything, Rias said. Why are you doing this? Not the training, I understand the strategic part of that. But the explaining. The being careful about giving me obligations I didn't agree to. He looked at her directly. I'm a stranger. You don't know me. Careful. She considered the question seriously, which he was already coming to understand was what she did with all questions. Someone failed to be careful with me, once, she said. About choices and their weight, and what it means to commit to something before you fully understand it. She did not elaborate on this, and something in her voice made him not ask. I decided some time ago that I would not pass that failure forward. He nodded. He thought about that. Also, she added, and the severity in her voice gentled slightly, in my experience, people who produce warm light when frightened are worth taking seriously. Aquino, from behind her teacup, made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. Issei looked at the table and felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, quietly, like an acknowledgement. Chapter 5. The Shape of Things Gathering. 3 weeks passed. They were not uneventful weeks, though the events of them were mostly internal, the kind that do not make good narratives because they happen in the space between visible things. In the training ground under the old school building, Issei learned to call the light while running, while distracted, while Rias was describing a history of supernatural factional politics that required significant attention to follow. He learned that the light responded to intent rather than concentration. That trying to force it produced a sputtering, uncertain glow, but moving through it rather than grasping at it produced something steady. Rias had described this as learning to trust a new instrument, and he had thought about that distinction for days afterward. He learned, from Aquino's quiet and meticulous instruction, that the energy signature his power produced was unique enough to make him visible to certain supernatural beings. That this visibility was double-edged. That being visible was dangerous and also, potentially, protective, because there were beings who would avoid a genuine solar signature the way night animals avoid daylight. He learned, from watching Rias during their sessions, that she was considerably more interesting than a single conversation could have contained. This last thing was not something he spent much time analyzing directly. It was simply present, the way the warmth in his chest was present, sitting there without demanding acknowledgement. On a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks into the training, Issei arrived at the clubroom to find Rias at the window reading a letter. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the particular stillness she had around her, the quality of someone who has received information they had been expecting and do not entirely welcome. He came in and set his bag down and waited. She folded the letter and set it on the table and turned from the window. Her expression was composed and very careful. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need to tell you before circumstances make it more complicated. All right, he said. She sat down. He sat across from her at the table, where the chess game was still arranged in its mid-game position, and he waited with the patience he had been developing, the quality of attention that matched her own careful pace. My family has considerable influence in the devil hierarchy, she said. Which means I have obligations I did not choose. Political obligations. A future that was arranged without my input. She looked at the chess pieces. I have been attempting, for some time, to find a path that is mine rather than simply assigned to me. She looked up. Your situation, what you carry and what it means, is genuinely extraordinary, Issei. I want to be honest with you, that has strategic significance for me personally. The people who are pressuring my future are people who fear power they cannot categorize. You're telling me I might be useful to you, he said. Not accusingly. I am telling you that I want you to know it, she said. Because I also want to help you, entirely separate from strategy, and I do not want those two things to become confused. Not for you, and not for me. He thought about this for a long moment. Outside the window the school grounds were going amber in late afternoon light. A bird crossed the window in brief silhouette. Can both things be true at the same time? He asked. You wanting to help me and me being useful to you. I think they can, she said. I think they are. I wanted to be certain you thought so too, rather than simply assuming. He looked at the chess pieces. The white pawn that she had tilted on its side in their first conversation was still lying there. He picked it up and set it upright. I want to be useful, he said. Not as a piece you move around. But actually useful. I want to learn enough to matter. Something in her face shifted, a subtle thing, like a door that has been braced against the frame settling slightly open. Then we are in agreement, she said. Aquino arrived with tea a few minutes later and found them both studying the chess board, Rias explaining the position with the precision of someone who has thought about it extensively, Issei asking questions that were, she noted to herself, the right questions. She set the tea down quietly and did not interrupt. That evening, walking home through streets that smelled of October leaves and someone's cooking drifting from an open window, Issei held his right hand loosely at his side. The warmth was there, as it always was now. Patient. Present. He thought about what Rias had said. About things being assigned versus things being chosen. About the distinction between a future that belongs to you and one that simply happens around you. He thought about the alley, 3 weeks behind him now. The cold that had spread from the wound. The absolute moment in which he had refused, wordlessly and completely, to let that be the end of everything. The light had answered the refusal. He thought, maybe that is the whole of it. Maybe power like this does not come from bloodline or prophecy or divine lottery. Maybe it comes from the moment when you look at something that wants to extinguish you and you decide, without drama, that you are not going to let it. And then you keep deciding that. Every day. Every morning. Every ordinary Tuesday on the way home from training. The first star had appeared above the rooftops to the east, steady in the darkening blue. He looked at it for a moment. Then he walked the rest of the way home in the comfortable dark, with warmth in his right hand and somewhere ahead of him the beginning of a story that was, whatever else it turned out to be, entirely his own. Act 2. What the Light Touches. Chapters 6 through 12. Chapter 6. The Peerage. The invitation came on a Wednesday, slipped into Issei's shoe locker sometime between the end of first period and the beginning of lunch. A single folded card with his name written on the front in handwriting that was precise without being mechanical, the letters evenly spaced and unhurried. He opened it standing at his locker. Inside, in the same careful hand, come to the clubroom after last bell. There is someone I would like you to meet. The card was signed with a single initial. R. He folded it, and put it in his breast pocket, and spent the rest of the school day aware of it there. A small warm rectangle against his ribs, though the warmth, he was fairly certain, was his own. The clubroom held 3 people when he arrived. Rias stood near the window in the last afternoon light, which had become, over these weeks, her natural position in the room. Aquino occupied the chair she usually occupied, teacup already in hand, unhurried. And seated on the long sofa with his arms crossed and the particular expression of someone who has been told to make a good impression and finds the instruction mildly irritating was a boy Issei recognized from school. Kibayuto. Second year. The kind of face that the school's population had collectively, and somewhat helplessly catalogued as unfairly constructed, with an easy athletic grace and blonde hair that fell across his forehead with what appeared to be natural carelessness. He was also, apparently, not entirely human. Yudo, Ria said, this is Issei Hayade. Issei, Yudo Kiba. He is my knight. Kiba unfolded himself from the sofa and extended a hand. His grip was measured, telling nothing beyond simple courtesy. I've heard about you, Kiba said. Good things? Issei asked. Accurate things, Kiba said, which was not precisely an answer but was, Issei thought, probably an honest one. They sat. Ria settled into the chair at the head of the table with the natural authority of someone who occupies spaces rather than simply inhabiting them, and she looked between the two of them with an expression that was pleased in a way she was not quite displaying. I want you to understand what a peerage is, she said, addressing Issei primarily. It is not a military unit, though it can function as one. It is not simply a collection of capable individuals, though it is that as well. She paused. It is a group of people who have chosen one another. The choosing matters more than anything else. Issei thought about the white pawn on the table. Is that what you're asking me? Not yet, she said. What I am asking now is simpler. I am asking you to know the people around you before you make any decision about whether to stand among them. She glanced at Kiba, who had the expression of someone listening to something he has heard before and finds truer each time. Yuto, tell him what you told me when I asked you to be here. Kiba looked at Issei with a directness that was not aggressive but was entirely unshielded. She gave me a reason to be alive, he said. Quietly, without drama. The way people say things that have been absolutely true for so long they no longer require emphasis. Whatever you're trying to decide, that is the only information I have that matters. The room was quiet for a moment. Issei looked at Rias. She was watching him with the careful patience he had come to understand was not restraint but respect, the refusal to fill silence that belonged to him. I'm not deciding anything today, he said. But I want to keep meeting people. The way you just did this. That is exactly what I had in mind, Rias said. Aquino poured more tea. Outside the window, the school grounds went gold and then gray in the long October evening, and the four of them talked until the building's lights came on automatically and reminded them that the world outside the clubroom was still moving at its ordinary pace. Chapter 7 Kaneko. The second member of the peerage he met under considerably less arranged circumstances. He was crossing the school's inner courtyard on Thursday morning, early enough that the benches were mostly empty, carrying a library book he had promised to return before homeroom, when he nearly walked into a small white-haired girl sitting cross-legged on the top of the courtyard wall with a rice cracker balanced on one knee and an expression of profound indifference to the 6-foot drop behind her. He stopped. She looked at him. The rice cracker did not fall. Your Issei Hayadu, she said. Her voice was flat and small and entirely certain. Yes, he said. The one with the sun thing. That's one way to put it. She ate the rice cracker in 2 bites, dusted her fingers on her uniform skirt, and regarded him with golden eyes that were measuring something he could not identify. Kaneko, she said, which he understood was her name rather than a greeting, though the distinction seemed minor to her. Rias Butch's Rook. Nice to meet you, Issei said. You smell warm, she said. Then, as though acknowledging that this required some context, not temperature. The other kind. He thought about this. Is that a problem? She considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. No, she said finally. It's unusual. Things that smell like that usually don't last. Last? In this world, she said, with a flatness that was not cruelty, but was something that had learned to live very close to it. Things that are actually warm tend to get used up. He stood in the early morning courtyard and looked at her, this small girl on a wall with her feet hanging over nothing, and understood that she was not warning him. She was telling him something true from her own experience, the way people share weather reports from places they have lived. I'll try not to get used up, he said. Something shifted in her expression. Barely visible, a movement at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, but was the place a smile might eventually appear if given sufficient reason. Okay, she said. She dropped off the wall with the casual precision of someone for whom gravity is a minor and negotiable inconvenience, landed without sound, and walked past him toward the school building. She did not look back. He stood in the courtyard for another moment, watching her go. The warmth in his chest had done something during that conversation that he filed away carefully. It had expanded, slightly, steadily, the way a banked fire breathes when a window is opened, as though it recognized something in her that it wanted to answer. He tucked the library book under his arm and went to return it before homeroom. Chapter 8. The Weight of What You Carry. Training in the 4th week took a different shape. Rias had spent the first 3 weeks watching what the light did naturally, cataloging its instincts, noting what it moved toward and what it moved away from. She had filled half a notebook with observations in that precise, unhurried handwriting of hers, and she had shared the notes with Issei each session with the quiet generosity of someone who believes that understanding your own nature is not something that should be withheld from you. In the 4th week she began to ask it questions. Not you asking, she clarified, standing at the center of the training ground with her arms loose at her sides. The light. I want to see what it does when it encounters something that resists it. She raised her right hand and let a small sphere of deep crimson power of destruction gather in her palm, controlled and contained, about the size of a closed fist. It rotated slowly, and the air around it had the particular quality of something that had decided to unmake whatever it touched. Don't attack it, she said. Don't defend against it. Just hold the light steadily and let them be in the same space. Issei called the light. It came easily now, the way breathing comes easily, without the focused retrieval of the first weeks. It settled into his right hand and spread up his arm and sat in his chest alongside his heartbeat. She walked toward him slowly, the crimson sphere rotating in her palm. When she was close enough that the two energies shared the same air, something happened that neither of them had entirely anticipated. The light did not recoil. The power of destruction did not advance. Instead, they simply occupied the same space with a quiet and absolute attention to each other, like two people in a room who have just realized they have been speaking the same language this whole time without knowing it. And then, very gradually, the crimson sphere grew slightly warmer in color. Not less powerful. Not diminished. Just altered at its edge, the deep red picking up a thread of amber, the way a fire picks up gold as it steadies. Rias looked at her own hand. Her expression was extraordinary. Not startled, exactly, but containing the kind of wonder that people who have been surprised very rarely still carry in reserve for the genuine article. It's not opposing it, Issei said, understanding this as he watched. It's just present with it. Yes, she said very quietly. Does it bother you? That it touched your power? She closed her hand and the crimson sphere dissolved. She stood looking at the space where it had been for a moment. No, she said. It doesn't bother me. She looked at him. It feels like something I didn't know I was cold for until it was there. They stood in the training ground in the silence that followed that sentence, and neither of them looked away, and the warmth between them was not only his. Afterward, climbing the stairs, Rias said without turning around, Tell me something true about yourself. Not about the power. About you. He thought about it on the stairs. I used to think I wanted to be impressive, he said. Popular. The kind of person other people notice when they walk in. And now I think what I actually wanted was to matter to specific people. Not everyone. Just the ones worth mattering to. She reached the top of the stairs and paused there, her hand on the door frame, and the light from the corridor above outlined her in something that was not quite ordinary light. That, she said, is a much more interesting thing to want. She went through the door. He followed. Neither of them said anything else about it, but the sentence stayed in the room with them all through tea. Chapter 9. Sona Citri and the Balance of Things. He met Sona Citri on a Friday, which felt appropriate for a meeting that rearranged certain assumptions. She was waiting in the corridor outside the Occult Research Club's building, which was a deliberate choice rather than an accidental one, the kind of positioning that communicates, without saying so, that one is aware of precisely where one is standing and has chosen it. She wore her student council president's armband with the same ease that Rias wore the particular quality of her own authority, not as an accessory but as a natural condition. Her eyes, behind neat glasses, assessed him with the efficient precision of someone who has been briefed and is now verifying. Hiya to Issei, she said. Not a question, but the kind of note a question that leaves room for correction if necessary. Yes, he said. Sona Citri. She did not offer her hand. I am the other devil in this town. I wanted to see you myself. Okay, he said. She looked at him for a moment with that precise gaze. You're calmer than I expected, she said. I've had some practice, he said. With being told things that should be more surprising than they feel. Something in her expression adjusted slightly, a fractional recalibration. Rias told me what you carry, she said. The solar signature. I want to be honest with you about what that means from a political standpoint, because Rias has reasons to be less direct about this than I do. All right, he said. He leaned against the corridor wall and waited. The supernatural world has been in a fragile peace for some decades. 3 factions that spent centuries trying to unmake one another, now coexisting through exhaustion and practicality as much as anything else. Into this peace comes a human boy in an ordinary Japanese town carrying a power that none of the factions created, none of them own, and none of them can categorize. She folded her hands in front of her. Every faction is going to want to know what that means for them. Some will want to contain it. Some will want to use it. Some will simply want it not to exist. Issei looked at the floor. He had known this, approximately, in the abstract. Hearing it stated with Sona's particular surgical clarity made it more concrete. What do you want from it? He asked. Nothing, she said. I want the peace to hold. An unclassified solar power in Rias's territory that everyone starts maneuvering around is a significant threat to the peace holding. She paused. Which means I have an interest in you being competent, stable, and aligned with someone whose judgment I trust. Do you trust Rias's judgment? When she's not being reckless, Sona said. Which is, fortunately, less often than it used to be. A pause that felt considered. You may be part of why. He said nothing. I am not asking you for anything, Sona said. I am giving you information clearly, so that you can make informed decisions. That is the only thing I know how to offer. She turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Yes? The power you carry is not a weapon, from what I can read of it. It is a presence. In my experience, presences are harder to defend against than weapons because you cannot simply block them. She looked at him over her shoulder with those precise dark eyes. Do not let anyone convince you to make it something smaller than it is. She walked away down the corridor with the measured, unhurried step of someone who has said what they came to say. Issei stood in the corridor for a long moment. He could feel the warmth in his chest, steady as it always was, and he thought about what she had said. A presence. He had been trying, in the training sessions, to shape the light into something directed. A beam, a shield, a defined output. He had been trying to give it edges. He thought about sunlight. Actual sunlight. It did not have edges. It was simply everywhere it was, all at once, with no distinction between what it chose to illuminate. He pushed off the wall and went upstairs to tell Rias. Chapter 10. The Rook and the Reason. Kaneko was in the kitchen of the old school building on Saturday morning when Issei arrived for training. Not the training ground. The kitchen, a small functional room off the main corridor that Issei had not noticed until now, which said something about how much of the building he was still not seeing. She was making something that smelled like miso with the focused application of someone who has decided that if a thing is worth doing, it is worth doing without wasted motion. He stopped in the doorway. She did not look up. Bucho is in the training ground, she said. She said to tell you to warm up first. Thanks, he said. He stayed in the doorway for a moment. Do you always come in on Saturdays? Sometimes, she said. The wooden spoon moved in steady circles. Do you like it here? He asked. The clubroom. The peerage. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, it's the first place I didn't have to be smaller than I am. He thought about that. What does that mean? I'm a rook, she said. High combat rating. Significant destructive potential. In most situations those things make people nervous. The spoon continued its circles. Rias Buchu wasn't nervous. She looked at me and saw what I was and said, good, I need exactly that. She paused. It's different. Being needed for what you actually are rather than despite it. Issei leaned against the doorframe. The sun thing makes people nervous too, he said. Different kind of nervous. More like they don't know what to do with it. Because it's warm, Kaneko said, with her characteristic flatness. People trust cold things more. Cold things are predictable. That's kind of a sad observation. It's just accurate, she said. Then, after a beat, but Bucho is choosing to understand warm things. She's been doing that since before you got here. You just gave her more practice. She lifted the spoon, tasted the miso with the focused judgment of a craftsperson, decided it was correct, and turned off the heat. Go warm up, she said. She hates it when people skip the warm-up. He went. But he carried the sentence with him down the corridor, and into the training ground and through the first 15 minutes of movement exercises, turning it over quietly. You just gave her more practice. He thought about Rias at the window with her letter. Rias on the stairs saying, "Tell me something true." Rias watching the gold thread through the edge of her own crimson power with an expression that was wonder rather than alarm. He thought about how she always said, "I want you to know it," before she told him anything strategic. How she always opened the door before she walked through it. When she came down to the training ground 20 minutes later with her dark training clothes and her hair caught back and a new notebook under her arm, he was already moving well, light and centered. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at him with a slight surprise she did not bother to conceal. You warmed up, she said. Someone told me you hate it when people skip it, he said. The almost smile appeared. Today it lasted a fraction longer than usual. Chapter 11, What Stays in the Dark. The stray devil appeared on a Tuesday evening, which was the kind of thing that happened, Aquino explained with her particular tranquil matter-of-factness, regularly enough to have a protocol. A stray devil is a member of a devil's peerage who has broken their contract of loyalty, she said, seated across from Issei in the clubroom while Rias read the report that had arrived by messenger crow 20 minutes prior. Once they break that contract, they operate outside any faction's authority. They become a problem to be managed. Managed, Issei said. Removed, Aquino said, with the serene precision of someone who has made peace with the requirements of a world that contains such things. Rias set down the report. She looked at Issei with the assessing expression he had come to read reasonably well, the one that was calculating something specific. I want you to come, she said. Not to fight. To observe. You cannot learn what this world requires of you from a training ground alone, and I will not send you into actual situations without preparation, but I think you are ready to see. Okay, he said. If anything escalates beyond what we can manage without you, I will tell you. If I tell you, you do exactly what I say. Not because I am giving orders but because in an active situation the person with the most information needs to be directing. Understood. She looked at him for a moment longer. Are you frightened? He thought about the alley. The honest answer was yes, at a low level, but it was the productive kind of fear, the kind that sharpens rather than paralyzes. A little, he said. The useful kind. Something in her face settled. The way things settle when they hear the true answer rather than the brave one. Good, she said. The useful kind means you're paying attention. The abandoned factory on the edge of the industrial district was the kind of place that collected darkness the way old wood collects moisture, drawing it in through every crack until the interior was darker than the outside night. Issei stayed close to Kiba without being told to, an instinct rather than an instruction. And Kiba moved through the space with the effortless quiet of someone for whom darkness was a familiar condition rather than an obstacle. Kaneko moved ahead of both of them without sound, her small figure navigating the debris with a sureness that reminded Issei of a cat on a familiar rooftop. Aquino drifted to the upper level, and he caught a glimpse of her against the broken ceiling where the night sky came through in panels, her long hair loose, her hands gathering small sparks of lightning with the casual economy of someone threading a needle. Rias moved at the center of all of them, and Issei understood for the first time, watching her, that the authority she carried was not simply given by rank. It was the specific quality of someone who has decided to be responsible for the people around her, and has been doing it long enough that the decision has become structural, built into how she occupies space. The stray devil found them before they found it. It came from the upper level in a cascade of broken metal and noise, enormous and distorted, a shape that had forgotten it was supposed to have a coherent form. It was not frightening the way human things are frightening. It was frightening the way wrong things are frightening, the particular cold of encountering something that has stepped outside the category it was supposed to inhabit. Rias raised her hand. And then Issei's chest did something he had not planned and had not asked for. The warmth expanded. Not into his hand, not into a directed light. It simply expanded outward from his chest in a radius, steady and unhurried, filling the space the way morning fills a room when the curtains are drawn, and in that warmth the factory interior became visible without a source, lit from everywhere and nowhere, warm gold light that had no shadow because it was not coming from one direction. The stray devil stopped. Not because it was hurt. Not because it was attacked. Because the light was simply present, in every part of the space simultaneously. And whatever lived in the distorted thing that had been a devil once could not find the dark to retreat into. Rias took the moment the light gave her, and used it with the clean efficiency of someone who does not need the opening to be large. It was over quickly. In the silence afterward, Kiba looked at Issei with an expression that was, for the first time, something beyond measured courtesy. You didn't aim that, Kiba said. No, Issei said. I didn't. Could you do it again? Issei considered. I think so. If I stopped trying to aim it. Kiba was quiet for a moment, looking at him. Then he said, quietly and without armor, that's the hardest thing to learn to do. Rias had crossed the factory floor and was standing a few feet away. She had heard. He could tell by the way she was looking at him, not the assessing look and not the instructional look, but a third look that he was still learning to read. We should go, she said. Her voice was steady. But well done. He walked out of the factory into the night air, and the warmth in his chest was not dimmer for having been given away. It was exactly the same as before. That, he thought, was probably important. Chapter 12, The Third Look. He thought about the third look for 3 days. It was not the kind of thought that crowded out other things. It sat alongside them, quiet and persistent, the way the warmth in his chest sat alongside his heartbeat. He went to class. He ate lunch. He completed an essay on the Meiji Restoration that his teacher returned with a comment noting that his conclusion was unusually considered for someone who had previously approached historical essays with what she described as enthusiastic minimalism. He went to the training ground on Wednesday and Thursday and told Rias what he had understood after the factory, about the light not needing to be aimed, about presence rather than direction, and she listened with the notebook open and wrote things down. And then they spent 2 hours testing whether he could maintain the ambient expansion while also doing something else, whether the light could be omnidirectional and intentional simultaneously. He could. She wrote 3 pages of notes, and told him this was significant and looked at the pages rather than at him while she said it, which was unusual, because Rias Gremery generally looked at what she was talking about. He thought about the third look. On Friday evening the clubroom was empty except for the 2 of them. Akino having left early for something she described only as a prior engagement, and Kiba and Kaneko having departed in sequence without particular explanation. This had the faint structural quality of arrangement, which he noticed and did not comment on, because pointing out when you have been given something tends to make the giving awkward. Rias was at the window with a book open in her lap that she was not reading. He was at the table with the chess game, which he had been slowly learning, moving a bishop 2 squares and then looking at it. The room was the comfortable kind of quiet. Can I ask you something? He said. You know you can, she said. He looked at the bishop on its square. In the factory. After. You looked at me a specific way. She was quiet. Not the assessing look, he said. Not the teaching look. The other one. I don't know what to call it, and I've been trying to work out whether to ask you about it for 3 days. She set the book down on the windowsill, cover up, pages open to wherever she hadn't been reading. She turned from the window to face the room. What made you decide to ask? She said. Because not asking felt like deciding, he said. And I didn't want to decide something that should be spoken out loud. She crossed the room and sat at the table, not across from him but beside him, which was different from her usual position and which she had chosen deliberately. He could feel the difference in the room. The subtle shift in the distance between things. The look in the factory, she said, was the one I use for things I am not ready to name yet. Because naming them changes them. She looked at the chess board between them. I am being careful. Not because I am uncertain about what I feel but because there are circumstances in my life that are not yet resolved, and I do not think it would be fair to ask anything of you while those circumstances are still pressing on me from the outside. The engagement, he said. He had pieced this together across the weeks from things said and not said. The arranged future. Yes, she said. It is not simple. But I am working on it. She looked at him then, directly, with the straightforwardness that was her most fundamental quality. I want you to know that the looking is not accidental. And I want you to know that I am not going to ask you to wait for something I cannot guarantee. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what he had said to her on the stairs weeks ago, about wanting to matter to specific people, the ones worth mattering to. I'm not waiting, he said. I'm just here. That's different. She looked at him for a long moment, and the evening light from the window was gold across the side of her face, and he thought about how she was the most careful person he had ever met with anything that mattered. Yes, she said very quietly. That is very different. They sat at the table with the chess board between them, and the evening coming in through the tall windows, and neither of them moved to leave, and the warmth in his chest was the steadiest it had ever been, and outside the stars were beginning their patient work above the school. Later, walking home, he held his right hand open at his side and let the light gather there briefly, just a warmth in the palm, visible only if you were looking and perhaps not even then. The October air was sharp and clean, and the street was quiet, and the residential lights were coming on in all the ordinary windows of all the ordinary houses along the road. He thought, I did not ask for any of this. Not the alley, not the power, not the impossible girl at the school gate in the late afternoon who looked at dying and said you deserved to understand what happened to you. He thought, and yet here I am, and here it all is, and none of it feels like something that happened to me. It feels like something I walked into with my eyes open. The light in his palm went warm and steady and then faded, gentle as a lamp being turned down for the night, and he walked the rest of the way home in the comfortable dark of an ordinary street in an extraordinary life. And there was a great deal still ahead of him, and that fact, for the first time in his memory, felt like an open door rather than a wait. He walked through it. Act 3. The Things That Cannot Be Taken Back. Chapters 13 through 21. Chapter 13. Letters from the Devil World. The second letter arrived on a Monday, and it was not delivered by Crow. It appeared on the clubroom table sometime between Rias leaving for her morning class and Aquino arriving to open the windows, sitting in the center of the chess board as though it had always been there, and the chess pieces had arranged themselves around it as a courtesy. The envelope was heavy cream paper with no stamp and no postmark and a seal in dark wax that Aquino looked at for a long time before she touched it. She did not open it. When Rias came in at noon and saw it, she stood very still for a moment in the doorway. Then she came in, set her bag down with the careful deliberateness of someone regulating their own reaction, and picked up the letter. She read it standing. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and set it in the inside pocket of her jacket, and she stood at the window and looked at the school courtyard with its ordinary population and its ordinary Tuesday quality, and Aquino waited. His family has moved the date forward, Rias said. Aquino set down the cup she had been holding. How far forward? 6 weeks. A pause. They want a formal acknowledgement of the arrangement by the end of the month. The room was quiet with the particular quality of a room in which something unwelcome has just been said out loud and cannot be unsaid. And what will you tell them? Aquino asked. Rias turned from the window. Her expression was composed with the precise effort of someone composing it deliberately. I will tell them I need time to consider the terms. She looked at the door, as though measuring what was on the other side of it. What I will not do is let it determine anything before I have finished determining it myself. Aquino was quiet for a moment. Then, with the gentleness she kept in reserve for things that actually required it, does he know how serious it is? Rias looked at the door for another moment. Not the full weight of it, she said. I have been careful about how much I place on him. He is not fragile, Aquino said. You know that by now. I know. Rias picked up the nearest book from the table, opened it, and set it down again without reading any of it. That is not why I'm being careful. I am being careful because it would be very easy for what I feel to become his problem to solve. And he did not agree to that. Aquino looked at her president with the expression she reserved for moments when Rias was being both admirable and mildly exasperating. You could tell him, Aquino said. Simply. The way you tell him other things. Rias picked up the book again, and this time actually looked at it. Yes, she said. I could. She did not say when. But Aquino, who had known her for a long time and understood the particular quality of her silences, thought it would be soon. Chapter 14, Asia. He found her on a Thursday afternoon, sitting alone on the low wall that bordered the school's eastern garden, which was the part of the school grounds that nobody used in October because the rose beds had gone dormant, and there was nothing in particular to look at except the quiet geometry of bare branches. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned toward the bare branches as though they were offering something he could not hear from here, and she had the quality of someone very new to a place trying hard to understand its rules. He had seen her twice before in the school corridors, the new transfer student, blonde and slight, with green eyes that had a quality of openness he had not encountered in anyone his age. He had noted her the way you note something that seems slightly out of its natural context without being able to identify what the context should be. She looked up when he approached, and her expression did the thing that expressions do when someone who has been alone for a while is suddenly not alone, a small complicated movement between wariness and hope. "Hello," she said. Her Japanese was correct and careful, the Japanese of someone who had learned it from a book rather than a neighborhood. "Hi," he said. He sat on the wall an appropriate distance away and looked at the bare rose beds. "Asia Argento, right? The transfer." "Yes." She looked at the branches again. "I am still learning where things are. It takes a while," he said. "I've been at this school 2 years and I still get turned around near the science building." She glanced at him with an expression that was not quite a smile but was looking for one. "You are being kind." "I'm being honest," he said. "The science building is genuinely confusing." This time the almost smile found its footing. It was a very good smile, the kind that arrived with its whole self rather than arriving in stages. They sat for a moment in the garden that nobody used. "Can I ask something?" he said. "Yes," she said. "You have a quality," he said, trying to find the right word. "A kind of light. Not visible, exactly. More like something adjacent to it." He paused. "I've been learning to notice that kind of thing." She was very still for a moment. Then, carefully, "What does it feel like?" "What you notice?" He thought about it. "Warm. Specifically healing warm. Like something that wants to close things that have been opened the wrong way." She looked at her folded hands. "I had a sacred gear," she said very quietly. "A healing ability. They took it from me." She did not say who they were, and something in her voice suggested that the story behind those words was long and involved significant pain. "I thought when they took it that I would feel empty. But I still feel it sometimes. The wanting to help. The reaching toward her things." He thought about what he had learned about sacred gears and the people who would want to take them. "They didn't take what made you that way," he said. "Just the instrument." She looked at him, and her green eyes were very bright, the way eyes get bright when someone has said something true that they needed to hear. "I should introduce you to some people," he said. "If you want. They're good people. A little strange. But the good kind of strange." "I would like that very much," Asia said. He stood and held out his hand to help her off the wall, and when she took it the warmth in his palm recognized whatever remained of her sacred gear and answered it quietly, the way one instrument answers another playing the same note in a different key. She felt it, and looked at his hand and then at his face, and he could see her deciding something. "You have a light too," she said. "Yes," he said. "Come on. I'll tell you about it on the way." Chapter 15, The Radius of Trust. Rias had, over the course of her life, developed a reliable sense for when a room had changed before she entered it. It was not supernatural, precisely. It was the accumulated attention of someone who had learned early that the quality of a space often tells you what its occupants are not yet saying. The clubroom told her, when she arrived on Thursday afternoon to find Issei already there with the new transfer student, that something had been established. Not announced. Simply established, the way certain facts established themselves through proximity and shared honesty. The blonde girl stood when Rias entered, with the particular posture of someone who has been trained into courtesy, and retained it out of genuine character rather than fear. Her green eyes were clear and Rias noted, slightly red at the rim, not recent but recent enough. "This is Asia Argento," Issei said. "Asia, this is Rias Gremery. She's the one I told you about." Rias looked at Asia Argento and felt the particular sensation of encountering someone who had been through something significant, and come out the other side of it still fundamentally themselves. It was not a common quality. "Hello," Rias said, with the warmth she reserved for people who had earned it through no performance of their own but simply by being what they were. "Hello," Asia said. "Issei said you are very direct. I hope I am not an imposition." "You are not," Rias said. She looked at Issei, who had the expression of someone who has done something he thinks is right and is now waiting to find out if it was. She looked back at Asia. "He told you some things, I imagine." "He told me there are people who took something from me who are probably not finished," Asia said. Clearly, without drama. "He said I should know that, and that knowing it is better than not knowing." Rias looked at Issei again. He had done, she noted, exactly what she would have done, which was tell the truth without embellishment because the person in front of him deserved it. "He's right," Rias said. She sat down and gestured for Asia to sit, and Asia sat with the neat precision of someone accustomed to rooms with rules. "Tell me about the sacred gear they took." "As much as you can," Asia told her. It took some time, and some of it was clearly painful to say, and Rias listened to all of it with the full attention that she gave to things that mattered, which was all the attention she had. Issei sat at the end of the table and did not interrupt and did not fill the silences, which was, she thought, the correct thing to do and also not a thing most people were capable of. When Asia had finished, Rias was quiet for a moment. "The ability itself is gone," Rias said. "But Issei is right that what generated it is not. Healing capacity at that level does not come from a gear alone. The gear is an amplifier. The source is something in you." She looked at Asia steadily. "With time and work, it may be possible to develop something from that source again. Not the same. Something new." Asia looked at her hands in her lap. "I was told I was worthless without it," she said. "You were told an enormous amount of incorrect things," Rias said, with the precision of someone identifying a fact rather than offering a consolation. "The people who told them to you had reasons to want you to believe them. That does not make them true." Asia looked up. Her green eyes were bright again. "Would you like to stay?" Rias said. "Not permanently. Not with obligations. Just here with us for a while. Until things are clearer." Asia looked at Issei, who nodded once, and then back at Rias. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." Aquino arrived with tea for 4, which told Issei she had heard everything through the door, and had been waiting for exactly this moment, and the 4 of them sat around the table in the autumn evening and the clubroom felt, for the first time, like it was approaching its actual size. Chapter 16, Pressure from the Outside. Riser Phoenix arrived in Issei's awareness not as a person but as a name, the way threats often arrive, as information before they are real. He heard it first from Kiba, who mentioned it with the specific controlled neutrality of someone choosing their words around something they find genuinely distasteful. "The Phoenix family," Kiba said, on a Wednesday afternoon in the training ground during a break, sitting on the packed earth floor with his back against the wall, and his practice blade across his knees. "Old family? Significant power. Regeneration ability, the Firebird lineage." He paused. "Riser is the heir. He has expressed, through the appropriate formal channels, his intention to honor the arranged contract with the Gremory family." Issei was quiet. "Rias told you," Kiba said. "It was not a question. She told me there was an arranged future, and that she was working on it," Issei said. "She didn't use his name." Kiba looked at the blade across his knees. "She doesn't like saying it," he said. "Not because of fear. Because saying it makes it more present, and she's been trying to keep it at a distance she can think around." Issei thought about the letter she had put in her jacket pocket without telling him. He thought about her at the window, her back to the room. "What is he like?" Issei asked. Kiba considered this with the honesty of someone who takes accuracy seriously. "He is accustomed to getting what he wants," he said. "Not through malice, particularly. Through a life in which the things he wanted have always been obtainable." A pause. "He will not understand being refused. Not because he is cruel but because the concept has not had occasion to become real to him." Issei looked at the training ground around him, the packed earth, and the high dark ceiling. "Does he know about me?" he asked. He knows there is a human with an unusual sacred gear in Rias's territory, Kiba said. He will not consider it significant. He does not have the frame of reference to. Issei nodded slowly. I'm not going to do anything about it, he said. That's not mine to do. It's hers. Kiba looked at him with an expression that was, briefly, uncomplicated respect. Yes, he said. That's the right answer. I just want to understand the shape of it, Issei said. So I'm not finding out pieces at a time. I know, Kiba said. He stood and picked up the practice blade. That's also the right answer. He looked at Issei with the particular directness of someone saying something they mean completely. She will find the way out of it. She has been building toward it for longer than she's known you. You are not the cause of her resistance. You are, I think, a reason the resistance matters more to her than it used to. Issei stood and called the light to his hand, steady gold in the dim training ground. Then I'll just keep being here, he said. Kiba raised his practice blade. From the beginning, he said. They trained for another hour, and the light held steady through all of it. Chapter 17, The Full Weight of It. She told him on a Friday evening when the light outside the clubroom windows had gone entirely blue and the room was lit by the tall lamp in the corner, the one that cast everything in amber, and it was just the two of them again. He had not asked? She had come in from a phone call with an expression that was resolved rather than troubled, the face of someone who has been carrying a decision and has decided to set it down in the open. His name is Riser Phoenix, she said. He is a pure-blood devil of the Phoenix family. The arrangement was made when I was very young, without my input, by people who had reasons of their own for wanting the two great families connected. She sat across from him. He is not a bad person in the simplest sense. He is simply someone who has never been told no by anything he pursued. Issei listened. My brother supports me, she said. He has always told me I have the right to choose my own future. But the political weight of refusing this arrangement is significant. It is not simply a personal matter. There are people whose alliances depend on this proceeding. What do you want to do? He asked. She looked at him for a moment with the steadiness that was so entirely her. I want to refuse it, she said. I want to refuse it on my own terms, through legitimate means, in a way that cannot be dismissed as a young woman's impulse or a temporary feeling. She paused. There is a provision in the old laws that allows for a rating game challenge. If I can demonstrate sufficient strength and independence through a formal game, the arrangement can be contested on grounds of established capability rather than sentiment. A rating game, he said. A structured battle between peerages, she said. Formal, with rules, overseen by neutral parties. It is not common for someone of my age to invoke this provision. It would be noticed. But it would be valid, he said. Yes, she said. It would be valid. He thought about the peerage. Kiba and his precise blade. Kaneko and her absolute solidity. Akino and the lightning she gathered like threading a needle. Asia, still learning the shape of this world. The warmth in his own chest. How long do we have to prepare? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her process what he had said, the we specifically, and he watched her decide not to object to it. 6 weeks, she said. Perhaps less. Then we start preparing, he said. Issei, she said, and her voice had changed, the composure not gone but thinned, the way ice thins when the temperature underneath it is warmer than the temperature above. You understand this is not something I am asking you to do for me. I know, he said. You're too careful to ask. That's why I'm offering. The lamp in the corner cast its amber light across the room, and outside the windows the blue evening had gone fully dark, and she sat across from him with her hands folded on the table between them, and something in her face did the thing it did sometimes when she encountered something she had not planned for, and found it was exactly right. Thank you, she said. Quietly. Completely. You don't have to thank me, he said. I'm just here. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. That's what I'm thanking you for. Chapter 18, What the Peerage Becomes. The training after that conversation had a different quality. Not urgency, exactly. The light in Issei's chest did not respond well to urgency, a fact they had established early, and which remained true. But there was a new directionality to things, a sense that what they were building together had a shape now, a specific use, a moment they were moving toward rather than simply skills accumulating in general preparation for a general future. Rias restructured the sessions. Morning time before school for individual skill work. Afternoons in the training ground for combined exercises. The peerage moving together, learning the particular grammar of how their abilities spoke to each other. What they discovered, over the first week of this new structure, was that the grammar was richer than anyone had fully mapped. Kiba's swordsmanship, already formidable, became something different in the ambient light. He moved through the golden warmth the way a fish moves through clear water, faster, more precise, as though the light was not simply illuminating him but giving him information about the space he occupied. He noticed this on the third day and looked at Issei with an expression of genuine surprise. "I can see my own blind spots," Kiba said, which sounded like a koan but was, Issei realized, a literal description. The light showed him the angles he was not covering. Kaniko's response was different. She became, in the presence of the ambient light, very still before she moved, and then she moved with a precision that was beyond her usual considerable precision, each strike placed at exactly the point of maximum effect. She did not comment on this. She simply used it. Akino sat out one session and simply watched, and afterward she told Rias, in the quiet way that meant she was saying something important, that the light suppressed a certain kind of interference she was accustomed to working around. She did not elaborate on what that interference was. Rias asked her once, gently, and Akino said only, "The parts of me that argue with themselves." She said it without visible weight, which meant the weight was considerable. Asia, in the light, did not develop new combat abilities. What she developed was a stillness that was its own kind of strength, a centered quality, as though the warmth settled something in her that had been unsettled for a long time. She had been learning to move, to defend herself, with the careful application of someone who understands they are compensating for an absence. In the light she stopped compensating and simply was, and that was, as Rias noted in the notebook, a different, and in some ways more powerful thing, and Rias herself. He was careful not to watch her too directly, because watching her directly when she did not know it felt like an intrusion on something. But in the peripheral attention he maintained during combined exercises he noticed that her power of destruction, when the ambient light was present, had the thread of gold at its edge consistently now, not just in controlled demonstrations but in motion, in genuine exertion. She mentioned it once, briefly, as a technical observation. The gold thread appears to increase the stability of the sphere at high output. She said it to the notebook. He said nothing, but the warmth in his chest did a thing that he was coming to recognize as the light's version of a smile. On the second Saturday of the new training structure, Kaniko arrived at the kitchen early and made rice balls for everyone, which she set on the table without comment before the session started. No one commented on this either. It was simply present, the way she was present, without announcement. Issei ate his rice ball before going down to warm up, and the warmth in his chest was, if possible, warmer than usual. He understood, somewhere around the third chew, that this was what it felt like to belong to something, not to be owned by it, not to be required by it, just to be part of a thing that was made of specific people who had chosen each other and were, collectively, more than their sum. He finished the rice ball and went to warm up, and when Rias came down 20 minutes later and found him already moving, she did not comment on it, but she smiled before she remembered not to, and then let the smile stay because deciding against it would have been dishonest. Chapter 19, Riser. He arrived on a Tuesday, which seemed wrong. People like Riser Phoenix should arrive on days with more dramatic weather, Issei thought. A Tuesday afternoon with thin clouds and the smell of rain that hadn't happened yet seemed insufficient. He came into the clubroom with the ease of someone entering a space they consider, on some fundamental level, already theirs. He was tall and broadly handsome in the way that money and ancient bloodline produce when they have had generations to refine the output, with light hair and amber eyes and the particular quality of someone who has never had reason to consider how they enter a room. He looked at Rias first, because she was the reason he had come, and his expression was warm in the way that a claim is warm, possessive rather than offered. Then he looked at Issei. The look lasted 2 seconds and contained, with complete honesty, almost no information, the way a glance at a doorstep contains no information about the house beyond it. Rias, Riser said. His voice was pleasant and unworried. Riser, Rias said. Her voice was even and clear and gave nothing. I wanted to see you before the formal proceedings. As a courtesy. He looked around the clubroom with a measuring interest. This is where you've been spending your time. Yes, she said. His gaze returned to Issei with slightly more attention this time. The human, he said. Not unkindly. Simply categorically. Issei Hayadu, Issei said. He kept his voice even. He was aware of the warmth in his chest, steady and present, not reactive. Riser studied him for a moment with the particular attention of someone who is not accustomed to looking twice at something and is doing so as a minor concession to unfamiliarity. There is an unusual energy, Riser said. He said it the way one might note an interesting architectural detail. Curious but not concerned. Yes, Issei said. Rias has always had interesting projects, Riser said, and he said it to Issei, but it was meant for Rias, the smile in it aimed at her. The room temperature did not change. But something in its quality did, a subtle shift, like the moment before a string reaches its tension. I am not a project, Rias said. Calmly. Absolutely. Riser looked at her with the expression of someone who has made an error they cannot locate. I meant, he began. I know what you meant, she said. And I know you meant it without malice. But I want you to hear me clearly. The people in this room are not projects. They are people I chose, and who chose me, and what that means is something I will not negotiate. She looked at him with the directness that was her most complete self. I understand why you are here. I will engage with the formal process through the appropriate channels. But if you came for a preview of my position, you have it. Riser was quiet for a moment. He was not a stupid man, Issei thought, watching him. He was a man encountering something he did not have a category for, and he was working out whether to dismiss it or reconsider it. The moment passed. I look forward to the formal process, Riser said. He inclined his head to Rias with a courtesy that was genuine if not particularly humble. He did not look at Issei again. He left. The room held its quality for a moment after he was gone. Then Kaneko, from the sofa where she had been sitting the entire time without anyone apparently remembering she was there, said, He smells like someone who's never lost anything. That, Akino said from the window, is a very accurate observation. Rias sat down. She let out a long, controlled breath. Issei went to the kitchen and made tea, which was the only useful thing he could think to do, and which turned out to be exactly what was needed. Chapter 20. The night before. The challenge had been formally lodged, accepted, and scheduled for the following Saturday morning. The intervening days had the particular quality of a held breath, not tense exactly, but aware, every ordinary moment carrying in its background the knowledge of what was coming. Issei spent Wednesday and Thursday in the training ground until Rias told him firmly that fatigue was a tactical disadvantage, and that if he did not sleep he would be less useful, not more. He went home and did not sleep well but at least tried, which she had said was the point. Asia made food on Friday, real food, elaborate and careful, and brought it to the clubroom for the whole peerage in the large containers she had learned to carry with the steadiness of someone determined to be useful in whatever way she could. They ate at the table together with the chess game pushed aside, and talked about things that were not the game, which was also a form of preparation. Kiba told a story about his first year with the peerage that he had not told before, something funny, and the telling of it was itself a kind of gift, the opening of something kept private offered freely as a gesture of trust. Kaneko ate 4 rice balls and said, at the end of the meal, that she thought they would win, stated as a fact in the same tone she used for all facts. And somehow this was more reassuring than any amount of enthusiastic declarations would have been. Akino laughed at something and it was the real laugh, the unguarded one, and the room held it for a moment before it faded. Issei looked around the table at these people he had not known 2 months ago and thought about what Kaneko had said, the first place I didn't have to be smaller than I am, and understood that this was true for more of them than just her. He stayed after the others had gone, helping Rias return the room to its usual order, which was a quiet and companionable thing, carrying cups to the kitchen and returning books to shelves and the general restorative work that a used space requires. When the room was in order she sat at the window with the lights of the school grounds below and the dark sky above, and he sat on the arm of the sofa across from her, near but not crowding the silence. Are you frightened? He asked. She considered this with the honesty she brought to all questions. Not of him, she said. His peerage is strong, but we have prepared well. I am not frightened of the game itself. She paused. I am frightened of the feeling I will have if I fail, and what I will be obligated to do after it. That's the useful kind of fear, he said. She looked at him, and he saw her remember having said that to him, weeks ago in the training ground. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. He looked at the chessboard in the dim light, the white pawn he had set upright weeks ago, still there. Can I tell you something? He said. You know you can. The first night I made light, he said. In my room. 3 seconds, in my palm, and then it was gone. I lay there afterward and I thought about why it came. I thought about it for a long time. He looked at his right hand. I think it comes because of the same thing that made me pick up a white pawn on a chessboard and set it upright when I didn't know what any of it meant. He looked at her. The refusal to let things stay knocked over. Not because it's strategic. Just because it's wrong for them to stay that way. She was very still. Tomorrow, he said, I am going to be there, and the light is going to be there, and we are going to make it as hard as possible for anything in that game to stay knocked over. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Ria said, very quietly, come here. He crossed the room and she stood to meet him, and she put her arms around him, not urgently but absolutely, the way someone holds something that is both precious and real, and he held her back with the same quality. And neither of them said anything because there was nothing left to say, and the warmth between them was both his and hers, and neither could have said where one ended and the other began. After a moment she stepped back and looked at him with a third look, and this time she did not try to name it, and he did not ask her to. Sleep, she said. You too, he said. He walked home in the late Friday dark with his chest so full of warmth that the October air barely registered, and above him the stars burned with their patient and absolute light, and tomorrow was coming, and he was ready. Chapter 21. The Game. The rating game existed in a bounded space created for the purpose, a construct between the visible world and the devil world proper, large as a district and detailed as a city, with streets and buildings and shadows and the particular ambient unreality of a space that knows it was made to be contested. Issei stood at the edge of it with the peerage around him and felt the warmth in his chest open the way it did before things that mattered, not with urgency but with recognition. Ria stood slightly ahead of them, her crimson hair loose today for the first time he had seen outside of mornings and evenings, and it was extraordinary against the pale artificial light of the game space, a color that had no business being as alive as it was. She turned and looked at each of them in sequence, and it was not the assessing look and not the instructional look but the third look, given to all of them equally, which meant something he did not have words for yet. Together, she said. One word. It was sufficient. The first engagement came quickly, two of Riser's peerage moving through a constructed street with the efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this environment. They were strong, coordinated, confident with the confidence of a team that had never been seriously tested. Kiba moved into the space between them before they completed their formation, and the light came with him, and in the light his movements had the impossible precision that they had developed in training, each angle covered before it became a threat. It was over in seconds, clean and without cruelty, and Kiba stepped back and adjusted his collar with the thoughtful air of someone reviewing a completed task. Two retired. The third and fourth members of Riser's peerage came from above, which was a sensible tactical decision in any other circumstances. Aquino was already at height when they arrived, and the lightning she had been quietly accumulating since the game began found them with the economic precision of someone who has been waiting for exactly this angle. The light below illuminated the arcs of electricity as they traveled, gold and white intertwined, and even the neutral observers watching from outside the game space noted it in their reports later. Two energies that had no technical reason to be compatible, moving together, as though they always had. Four retired. Kaneko encountered Riser's queen near the center of the constructed district, the most powerful member of the opposing peerage. A tall woman with the particular stillness of someone who has been in many serious situations, and treated them all with the same attention. The fight was the longest of the day. It was also, everyone present agreed afterward, the most remarkable. Two rooks by nature and capacity, moving through the constructed streets with a force that left the environment visibly altered. The light expanded around Kaneko steadily throughout, not helping her hit harder, not protecting her in any visible way. Simply present. And in its presence she did not need to be smaller than she was, and that, as it turned out, was the decisive difference. Riser met Issei in an open square at the center of the game space, which was where significant things tended to happen in constructed environments, as though narrative had a gravity. He looked at Issei with a different expression than the one from the clubroom. This one contained, finally, information. I understand now, Riser said, what I was looking at in that room. What were you looking at? Issei asked. Someone who understood what they had before they had it long enough to take it for granted. He said it without bitterness. As an observation. That is not common. What you have, Issei said, and he meant the regeneration, the Firebird lineage, the power that had never been refused, is also not common. But I think you've been using it as a substitute for something it can't actually be. Riser was quiet. She won't be happy, Issei said. Not the way a person is happy when they're where they're supposed to be. And I think some part of you knows that. Riser looked at him for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, the way things shift when a truth has been said in the right sequence, and at the right moment, and the person receiving it does not have a refusal ready because they were not expecting honesty instead of opposition. The light expanded from Issei's chest outward through the square, ambient and omnidirectional, the same light that had filled the abandoned factory, that had moved with the peerage through the game space, the same light that had been in his palm on the first night, and had not changed since in its essential quality. Riser stood in the middle of it. After a moment he sat down on the steps of a constructed building with the air of someone who has been standing for a very long time and has just noticed. Retired, Riser said. He said it himself, to the neutral observers. Calmly. Completely. Rias was at the far end of the square when it ended. She had handled the remaining members of the peerage with the clean competence that came from genuine preparation and genuine care for the people she was protecting, and she was standing in the game space light with her crimson hair loose and her expression open in a way he had seen it very rarely, the full face, nothing managed or composed, just her. She crossed the square. He met her in the middle of it. It's over, he said. Yes, she said. She looked at him with the third look, and this time when she looked at him the thing she was not ready to name had gotten readier, and she could see that he could see it, and she did not look away. The others arrived in ones and twos around them, Kiba and Kaneko and Akino and Asia emerging from the various parts of the game space, and they came together in the center of the square in the ambient gold light that was still slowly fading, and the thing they were together was entirely visible in that light. Kaneko stood next to Issei and said, very quietly, without looking at him, "You didn't get used up." "No," he agreed. "Good," she said. The light faded to warmth, and the warmth settled back into his chest, and the game space dissolved around them and returned them to the ordinary world, which was the same as it had been that morning in every visible detail, and entirely different in every way that mattered. Rias walked beside him as they left, close enough that the distance between them was no longer the instructional one or the strategic one but something new, something that had not yet been named but was now undeniably present. He let the warmth sit in his chest without trying to direct it, and it filled the space it was in completely and evenly, the way sunlight does, without preference or exception, and he thought, yes, this is exactly what I am, and it is exactly enough. Above the city the autumn sky was the particular blue of late morning on a clear day, absolute and unguarded, the kind of sky that makes everything beneath it look like it was placed there on purpose. He looked up at it for a moment as they walked. Then he looked forward, at the road ahead, at the people beside him, at the particular shape of a future that was, for the first time, entirely and irrevocably his.